Hi, and welcome back to my channel. I am bringing up notes from a blog post that I wrote a few days ago when I was thinking about working on this video. Now, what is this video about? It's called 10 Days with Nicholas Sparks. What happened in those 10 days? Well, in those 10 days, I read 24 of his books. 24, you say? Yes, 23 fiction and one nonfiction, which was a memoir that he wrote with his brother Micah Sparks. Now, I am in a group called Cats Book Nerds, and they have several reading challenges. And their challenge was to read one or two Nicholas Sparks books every month. And the way that the group is going to do it is by putting all of his titles on a wheel, like a Wheel of Fortune wheel, and spinning the wheel and then choosing the next read. Well, I kind of have this type A go-getter attitude, so I decided to binge read. Now, I first thought it would take me 2 weeks, then I thought 12 days. Well, guess what? I read every single Nicholas Sparks books in 10 days, watched all 11 movies, and I did it. I'm just really surprised that it went the way that it did. Now, I did not add up the amount of pages, so I am actually going to pause this video and find out how many pages that was. So I just used my iPad to count the pages, and it was 8,201 pages in 10 days. Yes, that averages to 820 pages a day for 10 days straight. But there's a bit more, because I also read The Last Lifeboat by Hazel Gaynor for a blog tour, and that was 384 pages. So I got quite a bit of reading done in 10 days. Now, when I read generally, now I'm just going to bring up my, I do have my iPad, which I will be referring to quite frequently in this video. But my average pages per day for the year has been in the range of between 424 pages per day up until 581 pages per day. So if you add in the 6,200 pages for Nicholas Sparks in that Last Lifeboat by Ms. Gaynor, then I read almost 850 pages a day for 10 days. So I'm not going to keep up that trajectory of reading for the rest of June or for any other time, but it worked out that way. So back to my notes. What is my assumption about Nicholas Sparks? Okay, now I read his entire backlist, which means now that any book that he releases I can read going forward, and I will review those individually. I'm debating whether or not I want to do individual reviews of all of these 24 books, and I may do that on Goodreads, I may do that on my blog, I'm not quite sure. Now, as mentioned, I binge read them and watched all the movies that were adapted from his books, which were 11 in all. Now, in all actuality, 10 books were adapted into movies, but the 11th book was written as a film and screenplay first. It starred Miley Cyrus and Liam Hemsworth, I should mention him. And then it was written as a book, and that is The Last Song. So 10 were adapted from books to movies. One was a movie that was then written as a book. I thought that was rather amazing. Now, I took a lot of brief notes, and the way that I took notes is different than any other way that I've ever done it. Generally, I will bunch up a host of reviews, 5, 10, 12, 15 reviews, and just write them one after another without the benefit of any notes, because I generally don't really need the notes. But because I was reading these books back to back to back, I thought, well, I should take some notes. So I created a really elaborate spreadsheet. And due to the spreadsheet that I created, I was able to just commit certain things to mind, particularly the characters, the inspiration behind all of the books that Nicholas Sparks wrote, the meanings that the books in the movies was intended to portray, things like that. Now, when I got to maybe the third book, I felt like I was crying too much. I was possibly being triggered, and I might stop this endeavor. I didn't owe it to anybody. I didn't even owe it to the group of ladies that had decided to read these books. I could just go on back to my blog tour books or my Neck Alley backlist or whatever I wanted to read. But the next book, when I was thinking about stopping because of the emotional toll that these emotionally roller coaster type books were taking on me, I read Nights in Rodanthe. Okay? And then I watched the movie. Okay? So after reading and then watching Nights in Rodanthe, and I lost my place? Yes. After watching and seeing Nights in Rodanthe, I felt like, wow, I'm going to finish. I'm going to continue. And I'm really glad that I did. I'm glad I didn't give up. Now, why is it that I thought that I would give up with these 24 books of Nicholas Sparks, 23 being fiction? Well, because in most of Nicholas Sparks' books, there's a terminal illness, be it cancer or what have you, and there's a death. Almost in every single book. Now, you have to wonder, perhaps these books are therapeutic for Nicholas Sparks. A lot of these books, as I read the inspiration for each and every book, which I love his website because it provided keynotes about inspiration, and I'll talk about that in a few moments, was based on personal experience. So once I was, okay, someone's going to die, someone's going to get very, very ill, someone's going to hang on to the last moment, I backed up a bit, relaxed a bit, and said, okay, I'm going to continue. And that's the decision I made with Nights to Rodanthe. And you probably hear a lot of traffic, and I cannot change that. So anyway, now, the thing is, there is one movie that was based on a book, and that is called The Best of Me, that had a tragic ending. That I found out, I think it's on Netflix, that there is an alternate version. It could have been Amazon Prime, but there's an alternate version of that movie, a happily ever after version. Because I had just read The Best of Me, I decided not to, and I still have not watched the alternate ending. And the only other movie that I knew that had alternate endings was the movie Clue. The movie Clue had 3 different endings, and I've watched all of those way more than several times. But I chose not to do that with The Best of Me. I decided to leave it. Now, I want to say that not only do I plan on reading his books going forward, but there are some similarities in some of his books that I noticed. Like, for example, The Guardian. That was, in a very loose way, reminded me of The Watchers by Dean Koontz. Now, in Dean Koontz, the dog's name was One, but in The Guardian by Nick Sparks, the dog's name was Singer. Now, the dog in Dean Koontz's book, if you read The Watchers, was not it was a genetically created dog, so to speak, where Singer was a real dog. I think he was a Great Dane. I'm not even sure of the breed. But for some reason, those books just reminded me of each other. And then there was another book I read of his, which was Message in a Bottle. That reminded me of Love Story by Eric Siegel. Now, I read and watched Love Story when I was maybe 12 or 13 years old, but 5 decades later, believe it or not, I remember that movie, and I know it had Ryan somebody in it. I'm drawing a blank on his name. But I loved that movie, even though as a child, I cried and cried through it. So I knew when I got to Message in a Bottle and I started to see I felt like there was a little bit of correlation between those. So when I was reading Nicholas Sparks' books, even though they all had emotional tolls on me, it kind of took my whole reading career and put everything into perspective. And I really, really appreciated that. But I do want to mention one thing. I have a strong moral ethical code. Okay. So when it comes to morality, my conscience did ping me a few times when I was reading his books. I'm not a fan of sex before marriage. I'm certainly not a fan of adultery or cheating in any fashion. So with some of the stories, I had to just say, okay, I have a goal of reading all of these books. And with that goal, I am going to come across some of the couples in his stories that do things that my conscience would not allow me to condone. But in so doing, I tried to understand the message that Nicholas Sparks was trying to convey in each and every book, because I do feel that this masterful storyteller is a man that conveys messages. And whether it's by research, inspiration, life experience, or what have you, everything played a very important role in each and every book that he wrote. And I applaud Nicholas Sparks. I find him to be incredibly talented, very knowledgeable, did his research. Yes, he wrote a lot based on life experiences, and I'm actually going to go into that. I mentioned about inspiration, but I will say that overall, it's been an amazing, amazing experience, and I'm glad that I did it. I'm really surprised that I got, what did I say, 8,201 pages or 6,200? I lost track, but I've got thousands of pages read in just 10 days. Now, in my spreadsheets, I wrote summaries. I'm not going to go over the summaries, because if I go over the summaries of 24 books, this video will be 2 or 3 hours long. But I thought I would just touch base on some of the reasons that he wrote some of these books. And I'll just pick out a few. I'm certainly not going to do all 24. Now, I mentioned that I said Message in a Bottle reminded me of Eric Siegel's book Love Story, but it might have been A Walk to Remember. So I just wanted to correct myself. And as far as my favorite book, that was hard to say, because I think Nights in Rodanthe was one of my favorites, but then as I got deeper into it, I think Every Breath was also a favorite. So I loved finding out why Nicholas Sparks wrote each of these books and what they meant to him. Now, according to his website, now, when I read these books, as I was reading these books, I used a lot of online resources. I went to Nicholas Sparks' website, I went to Wikipedia, I went to Fantastic Fiction, I went to Goodreads, and I also went to imdb.com. And then I found a couple of other smaller websites, but I didn't spend a lot of time on those, because with all the other resources I had plenty to go with. Now, when you read A Walk to Remember, you have a 17-year-old couple, okay? With this 17-year-old couple, and I want to tell you the names, Landon Carter and Jamie Sullivan. She is a Bible-thumping young woman because her father's a preacher, and he has to take her to a school dance. And they hit it off. As different as they were, he had been like hanging with a crowd of kids who were pretty rambunctious, but now he's focused on this young girl, and she says something very touching in this movie or in the book. it's promised me one thing: you won't fall in love with me. Now, in this case, this book had Mandy Moore and Shane West, which, Shane West is an idol to many people. I personally preferred the book over the movie, but that's just me. And one thing about A Walk to Remember, with this young girl having cancer, leukemia, I believe it was, at the young age of 17, this particular book was dedicated and inspired by Nicholas Sparks' sister, Danielle Sparks Lewis. Now, I knew that because of going to his website, but the last book that I read by Nicholas Sparks was his memoir, 3 Weeks with My Brother. And that's how I was able to learn more about his sister, her fight with cancer, and the impact that it had on her family, most notably Nicholas Sparks. So A Walk to Remember is one that I will remember and most certainly reread. I probably won't rewatch the movie because it wasn't like my favorite, but the book definitely deserves a reread. Now, when I moved on, now the way that I did it is, I think the way these books came out, it was Message in the Bottle, The Notebook, and then A Walk to Remember. If I'm not mistaken, I think that's the order the books were released, but I read A Walk to Remember first. Then I went on to read Message in a Bottle, and that was, the characters were Teresa Osborne and Garrett Blake. Now, in this book, I liked it because it had the movie rather. I liked it because it had Kevin Concept in it. But what I liked about this book / movie was the concept of loving more than one person. That concept is intriguing to me because I've been married for over 40 years and don't know what it would be like to have love for more than one person. So watching this viewpoint from the book and from the movie was pretty intriguing. Now, interestingly, Message in a Bottle was inspired by his father after the death of his mother. Now, Nicholas Sparks lost his mother in 1989, shortly after he was married, and that's where the inspiration for Message in a Bottle came from. So I thought that was pretty interesting. And I will say that, again, by reading his memoir, I learned more about his relationship with his parents, but most notably his relationship with his father. So by me reading Message in the Bottle, which was only the second book of his that I read, I didn't understand the dynamic between him and his father until I got to his nonfiction book. So I thought that was something worth mentioning. We'll talk about, let's jump ahead to A Bend in the Road. Okay, I'm jumping past The Rescue, which was really good because The Rescue was basically about a volunteer fireman and his memories of childhood, which were driving him. And he had nightmares, and they were waking nightmares. And so we're just going to bypass that because I want to talk about A Bend in the Road. So just wanted to let you know a little bit about that. Now, in this particular book, we have about Miles Ryan. His life apparently ended when his wife was killed in a hit-and-run accident. It was 2 years since her death, and now Miles is wondering, can he start again? A Bend in the Road was actually his first mystery romance, and I just liked the change in direction. Yes, tragic. There was tragedy because his wife died. At the setting was he was a widower, but this book introduced a little bit of mystery, and I thought that was pretty cool. And those characters were Miles Ryan, Sarah Anderson, and Jonah Ryan. Jonah was his son. So then we have Nights in Rodanthe, which, as I mentioned, was my favorite book up until then. And our characters in that book were Adrian Willis and Paul Flanner. I'm sorry, forgive me for that. And in that book, I actually liked the movie better than the book. It's a touching story for a man who travels for a year to be with his son, And through letters, he plans on a future with the woman he falls in love with. The thing is, the two lead characters were based on how Nicholas Sparks fell in love with his then wife, Kathy. Okay? Now, the movie was in 2008, and it was an adaptation of the book, obviously, and it starred Richard Gere and Diane Lane, but it also had Christopher Meloni. I loved that movie, and it was his fourth film adaptation. Now, one thing is that, again, tragedy, okay, but the ending was so touching, and I do have my notes here as to why I found the ending so touching, but I think I'm going to hold that back because I don't want to spoil it for anybody that might want to read that book. So that was a really, really good book, Nights in Rodanthe. Despite the tragic ending, it was just amazing. Then I went on to The Guardian, which was Julie Berenson, Richard Franklin, and Mike Harris. Another mystery thriller. Like, yes, there was a romance, the romance between Julie and Mike, but we had Richard Franklin as the obsessed stalker. Yes, a stalker. Yeah, he went there. Chilling and heartbreaking at the same time. An amazing book. And as far as I know, this one was not a movie. And then I went to Dear John. Now, anybody that has any knowledge about life or reading or whatever know that a Dear John letter is a breakup letter. So, in this book, we have Savannah Lynn Curtis and John Tyree. And here we have John, who ended up in the Army after dropping out of school. And before he went to the Army, he has 4 or 6 weeks with Savannah, and they fell in love. And he was only supposed to be enlisted for 2 years, but he continued his enlistment because of 9/11. And over the course of him serving different tours in the Army, Savannah married someone, and his name was Tim. And she had to write him a Dear John letter. And that movie, I'm not sure if it was the book or the movie, but the ending, and I'm trying to avoid spoilers, the ending came out far differently than I thought it would. Because I will tell you right now, I'm just going to tell you, Tim had, I believe, stage 4 cancer. But stage 4 cancer isn't always terminal. In fact, I believe there's a 25% survival rate for patients with stage 4 cancer. So that ending kind of surprised me, considering it's Nicholas Sparks, where somebody always dies. So I probably have spoiled it. Then I went on to The Choice, which was in 2007. Our characters were Gabby Holland and Travis Parker. And here we have two neighbors who fall in love, and this again was adapted to a movie. And we have here how Gabby is involved in an accident, and because she's involved in the accident and is in a coma, this affects the person of that's her love interest, Travis, and he's racked with guilt, and he's trying to decide whether to take her off of life support. Now, they had a prior agreement that if anything happened to either one of them, and if they ended up on machines to sustain life, 12 weeks would be the cutoff. That's why it was called The Choice, and that's where I'm going to stop, because you might not have read it. Then I went on to The Lucky One, and our characters there were Logan Thibault, Elizabeth Clayton, Ben Clayton, and Keith Clayton. This book was really good because of the title. And I'm like, what? Why would he name this book The Lucky One? Well, he always has a good reason for what he does. In fact, the way that he designed this book, or was inspired by this book, was an image, And in his mind's eye, he saw a Marine staring at a photograph. So it took Nicholas Sparks some time for that image to come to fruition. Now, when I read about these inspirations for these books, it's amazing to me that he has the talent. It started with that image, and he said he couldn't get it out of his mind. It took him more than a couple of years to figure out all the nuances of putting this story together. And then the question is, why was he staring at this image? Who was in the picture? What is the status of their relationship? And then little by little, his story came to life. That was The Lucky One. Excellent, excellent book, and excellent, excellent movie. Then we have the last song, which included Will Blakely and Veronica, or who was called Ronnie in the book, Miller. And this book was so touching. It looks like I have 0 notes on that one, but I'm going to tell you, basically, it was about a girl who, as she was growing up, she became a concert pianist. Her father was a concert pianist, but her parents got divorced when she was 17, and I think she 15, and she was about to turn 18, and she had to spend the summer with her father whom she had not spoken to for 3 years. So the last song was very emotional because there was a romance in there, but the book also had other relationships, her relationship with her brother and her relationship with her father. So there were 3 relationships in the last song. No notes on that one, but easy to remember. Then there was Safe Haven. Katie, Alex Wheatley, Joe, and Kevin Tierney. I'm sorry, there were 4 characters in that one. And in Safe Haven, you have a very, very emotional story, just like every other one. You know, and when you read these books, you just find yourself so drawn into them, you know, and that's how Safe Haven was for me. Same for The Best of Me, The Longest Ride. I love The Longest Ride because in that one, the character was a bull rider. And see, this is where adaptation and books go this way. Because in the book, our character, what was his name in The Longest Ride? Luke Collins. Luke was determined to continue as a professional bull rider, PBR, because his mother could lose the family farm. It was about to go into foreclosure. And that was a very lucrative career at that time. So even though he had sustained serious injury before, as a matter of fact, at one point when he sustained injury, he was in a coma for, I believe, 10 days. And his mother wanted him to give up bull riding, but he continued to want to ride a bull for saving his mother's farm. But when I watched the movie, his motivation for wanting to continue to ride was different. And that happens. It just happens because books are turned into screenplays, and then screenplays are turned into movies. So there's going to be some literary license, some artistic license, and the direction is going to skew a little bit. But it doesn't take away that it was still a good movie. Then we had See Me with Maria Sanchez and Colin Hancock. And that was yet another great book. Not a movie made on that one, but it was one that I really, really enjoyed because with See Me, we had Colin Hancock, who was given his second chance at his best shot because he had history of violence. Colin came from a very violent, law-breaking family. In fact, Colin even ended up in jail for, I think, 4 years. He got an 8-year sentence, which was, with good behavior, came up to 4 years. And now he has a chance to get a second chance in life and putting his past behind him, which means applying himself towards becoming a teacher. So now Colin is in college as an older adult, and now he wants to become a 3rd grade teacher. And he has inspiration for the reason that he wants to become a teacher of 3rd graders. Then we have Maria Sanchez, who's a hardworking daughter of Mexican immigrants, and it's her and Colin who become the couple in this book. The thing is, Colin and Maria face challenges. Of course they face challenges. It's Nicholas Sparks. It doesn't always mean happily now or happily ever after, but this book had suspense and emotion, and I thought it was really, really great, especially because Colin worked on his temper throughout the book, and I believe this one was a movie as well, if I'm not mistaken. And if it wasn't a movie, it should be, because it was a really good book. Then we had 2 by 2, and in 2 by 2 we had a different book by Nicholas Sparks. Now, this book came out in 2016, and Nicholas Sparks got divorced from his wife, Kathy, of 25 years in 2015. So there's a lot of mixed reviews on 2 by 2. And 2 by 2 was, to me, the most depressing of all the books. Not so much because, say, there was a death or a major illness, just because it was Russell Greene was what he thought was happily married. His wife was a stay-at-home mother. Her name was Charlotte. And one day she says, I'm getting a job. But just before she got the job, Richard Greene was really feeling very threatened by the attention one of his bosses was paying to his wife. So Richard started his own advertising business, and Charlotte decides, okay, our child is 6 years old, I'm getting a job. Our daughter is 6, it's time for me to get a job. Well, she ended up working for the man that had this crush on her when her husband worked for him. Now, in this particular book, 2 by 2, he becomes almost a stay-at-home dad and a single dad. But there's romance in there. And I do like the way it ended, but it was kind of on the depressing side. Then I read Every Breath, and I'm going to get the book. This is the only one that I had a print arc to. As you can see, I got the invoice when I got the arc. This is the only book that I had the print arc to. And I'm kind of glad that I did, because I really got to read his acknowledgments in the beginning. Like, I just want to read a little bit of it. He says, for me, the creation of any novel is a bit like I imagine childbirth to be, a process of anticipation, terror, grinding exhaustion, and eventually exhilaration. An experience I'm glad I don't have to endure by myself. And then he talks about the people that helped him along the way, his literary agent, his publisher, the people who helped him when it came to movies and so forth. And I thought, okay, I'm kind of glad I have this book as a print book, because there was also an author's note at the end. And I liked when, I have to read this. While my novels generally hew to certain expected norms, almost every single book is set in North Carolina, which is where Nicholas Sparks lives. They all feature a love story. He says, etc. I will add tragedy, illness, and death. He says, I do try to vary the themes, characters, or devices in interesting ways with every book. He says, I've always loved the literary device of self-insertion in which the author himself makes an appearance in a fictional work, sometimes as a thinly veiled autobiographical nature, like Vonnegut in Slaughterhouse-Five, or merely incidentally like the character of Stephen King in The Dark Tower, Volume 6, whose entirely fictional diary plays a role in the story and whose death is mentioned in a novel occurring in 1997. And he talks about other authors that inserted themselves in the books. So in this book, we have True and Hope. It's entirely fictional, but he says he draws the inspiration of this couple from his own experiences. Why? Because it started off with True. I cannot say the country in Africa, but True lived in Africa as a guide. He was a wilderness guide. And so when Nicholas Sparks wrote this book, it was based on his travels to Africa and how he enjoyed all the different countries that he visited when he was there. And it says here in his acknowledgments or his author's note that he visited Africa more than once. So it was kind of good to have a print book in order to really appreciate how Nicholas Sparks writes these books and how they come about. Now, with this particular book, Hope Anderson has been living with her boyfriend for 6 years. And I think it's her birthday or something, and she thinks he's gonna pop the question. I have to tell you about this one. He says, I think we should buy a vacation home in X amount of years, and here's a financial plan to do it. I'm going to need a certain amount of money from you every single month, and we're going to build up a nest egg, and then we're going to own a second property. She's like, what? I was expecting a marriage proposal. That's how the book starts off. And then we have True Walls. Now remember, okay, I just looked at my notes. Zimbabwe. He lives in Zimbabwe. He is a single father, and he is a guide. He works 6 days a week, months at a time. And his father, he needed to come home to sort out his father's effects. And that's when he fell in love with Hope Anderson. So that was a really good book, as mentioned, Every Breath. Then I went on to The Return. Now, when you read The Return, we have Trevor Benson, who had been tragically injured in a motor blast. I think he was in Afghanistan. I don't remember if it was the Army or the Marines. And he came home to devastating injuries, and he had to regroup. He had to get his life back in line. Now, he was caring for his grandfather's beehives, and he decided to go to medical school, okay? And then he connects with somebody named Natalie Masterson, and with this, there's also a teenage girl named Callie. So, you have a romance, but then you have a teenage girl named Callie. So the story it was another relationship story. Who was Callie? Why was she living on her own? And what role did these people have in getting her reunited with her family? Really, really good book. Then I went on to The Wish, which actually was a nominee for Goodreads Choice Awards Best Fiction. And it was a really good one included Maggie Dawes, who became pregnant when she was 15 or 16 years old, and she was sent to live with her aunt because it took place in 1996, and I don't think this is the one where the girl was pregnant at, I don't know. Anyway, I might be getting this, but she goes to live with her aunt, okay? And she's living on the Outer Banks of Carolina. Can I say this? Ocracoke? Yes. And she meets Bryce Trickett, who was one of the only other teenagers on the island. And he had been accepted to West Point, but they fall in love, and he's ready to give up everything he has for his career at West Point, because I believe this is the story where the girl is pregnant, and he wants to become the father of her child, and he'll work any job or whatever. So the question is, can this young couple have a chance when this young man would be the perfect candidate for West Point? That's the story there. And then his last book as a standalone novel that I read was Dreamland, which is his latest book, and that came out in 2022. And this is a love story about risking everything for a dream and whether it's possible to leave a dream behind. Here we have Kobe Mills, who could have been a musical genius, but tragedy took place, okay? And so now he has more duties than just playing music. He also meets a woman named Morgan Lee, who has aspirations of becoming a big country music star in Nashville, and they fall in love. And that was a beautiful, beautiful story. And then we have another woman whose name is Beverly, and she was fleeing her abusive husband and trying to piece her life together. So you have this couple over here, but then you have Beverly and her 6-year-old son. So you wonder, how does Nicholas Sparks tie in together these stories? Unbelievably so. Unbelievably so. Most definitely. And then I went back in time to The Notebook and The Wedding. The Notebook was, I believe, Nicholas Sparks' third book. It came out in 1996, and it was the Calhoun family saga, and it also it was part of a duology, and the second book was The Wedding, which came out in 2003. So in The Notebook, we have our couple, Noah and Allie, and their love story. Now, I remember The Notebook. It's the only book of Nicholas Sparks that I had already read, which was back in 2000. And I had watched the movie with James Garner. Oh, goodness gracious. I'm drawing a blank on the female character. I'm going to shoot myself in the foot later. Anyway, and so you have a dual timeline story where Noah and Allie fall in love as teenagers. And then you have a story of an older man visiting his wife, Jenna Rollins, I believe it is, visiting his wife in a nursing home and reading from a notebook to her and telling her stories. Oh, I just spoiled it. Reading to a woman in a nursing home. So, as Nicholas Sparks, I think I'm going to edit this part out. You have the story of Noah and Allie as teenagers and how they met and fell in love, even though at some point Noah went off to war. And then you have an old man reading to a woman in a nursing home. And when he's reading to her, he's telling her of a love story, but he always leaves her hanging. Now, the woman he's reading to has Alzheimer's. So she doesn't know who it is that's reading to her or who he's reading to her about. I don't want to say too much because it could be a spoiler, but it has to be a spoiler because if you read The Wedding, Notebook and The Wedding, and how they were written years apart, and the story was basically, and I'm not going to spoil The Notebook because I hope that I will inspire you to want to read some of these books. But in this book, The Wedding, it was 30 years of marriage for Wilson Lewis. And I'm not going to tell you who he was the son of, but I will tell you it's connected to The Notebook. His marriage has reached a stalemate. He and his wife, well, I'll just give you a quick summary. Their 29th anniversary, he completely forgets. So she goes to New York and spends a week or two with their son. She comes back home and things are just kind of cold between them. But the thing is, he loves her intensely. And he tries to figure out a way to make her fall in love with him again. So I really like The Wedding. And so when you read the summary, it says after 30 years of marriage. So what happened between their 29th anniversary and their 30th anniversary? That's what makes the story so amazing. Then I read another duology of his, which the first book they both actually looks like they came out in 2005, and I do remember why. They were the Jeremy Marsh series, and they were True Believer and At First Sight. And I remember the reason why he wrote At First Sight is because he had a 45-page epilogue to The True Believer. And his editor was basically like, this epilogue is too long. So he quickly wrote first sight. Now, up until these, I remember I didn't read these books in order of publication because I read all the standalones first and then I read the two connected duologies. But up until I got to the last standalone, which was Dreamland for his 2022 novel, I was 5 stars pretty much all the way through. Get to the Notebook, still 5 stars. The Wedding, maybe 4 stars, maybe even 5. Then I got to True Believer, going down to 4 stars, and we get to At First Sight, staying around 4 stars. Now, basically, these books were about, especially the first one, True Believer, is a journalist went to work on a story in a small town in North Carolina where these mysterious lights would shine over a graveyard, and they were supposed to be supernatural. So his job was to interview the town members to see if this was a real phenomenon or whether it was whatever. That's what True Believer was. And then At First Sight, well, there was a love story, of course, in True Believer. And when we get to At First Sight, the couple and their relationship continue. But I'm just going to leave it at this and say this. True Nicholas Sparks style of writing with his Greek tragedy writing. Let's leave it at that. Then the last book I read was 3 Weeks with My Brother, which was his 2004 memoir with his brother Micah Sparks. Now, even though it was called 3 Weeks with My Brother, there was a lot of reminiscing about Nicholas Sparks' life as a child, as a teenager, as a young married husband, and as a father, as his relationship with his sister when she became ill with cancer, her passing, losing his mother, his father. So it was a recounting of his life up until, say, 2004. Even though he was on this really, really great excursion with his brother, the story wasn't, I thought it was going to be like a conversation between two brothers, two very successful millionaire brothers who came from a very poor existence to where they are in life now, and how their lives changed and how it impacted their relationship, especially with the loss of their sister, their mother, and eventually their father. But I read it more as a recounting of Nicholas Sparks' life up until then. Now, me personally, with him being divorced now, I think that I went into this book with like an attitude almost. So I'm only giving this one 3 stars because as happy as Nick Sparks was with his wife and with their 5 children, that was in 2004. Whereas you go up to 2015 and now they had a very, very, very nasty divorce. So all I would say is Nicholas Sparks, it's time for another memoir. Why? Because let me check this. I think I have. He got divorced in 2015, and 1, 2, 3, 4. There's been 5 books since. And I'm sure there will be a book in 2023, if not definitely 2024. So he hasn't lost his talent. His talent is still there. Like Dreamland was a great book. That was his most recent book. So in as much as I wanted to read all of his backlist, I did read 3 Weeks with My Brother. But, I don't want to end this on a negative note. I don't. In fact, I thought I was done with my iPad. If I look at my notes, I basically said at the end of my blog post This has been an amazing experience, and now I can say for sure that I am a fan of Nicholas Sparks. So I want to leave it on a positive note. It has been an amazing experience. And one thing I want to add is the writing. How an author, any author, not just Nicholas Sparks, just, dozens, millions, hundreds, whatever, can take an image or an idea or a thought and flesh it out to a story that can compel readers and bring in hundreds of thousands of reviews, or in Nicholas Sparks' case, 11 movies. I think there's another movie being adapted. I don't remember what the name of it is, but there is another movie, I think with Universal Studios, that is being adapted. So he's got the money. He's got the talent. And I loved it. So I don't know how long this video it is. I had to do it in clips. I did have a phone call and I had to get the door and whatnot. I'm going to go ahead and thread it all together and incorporate images throughout, hopefully. And I just want to thank you for watching. I hope that you will be like me and become a Nicholas Sparks fan. But I do have to mention something. And it just dawned on me. I got a direct message from somebody yesterday saying that my mom has stage 4 cancer. And when I read one of his books, I cried all the way through. Is there any other book that I should avoid of his so I am not triggered? So I gave her the books that I thought might be, the titles of the books that I thought might be triggering for her. So I want to say this, that even though these books, a lot of these books are heavy, they're heartbreaking, they are utterly compelling and written by a very, very talented author. So I would recommend that you go to either Goodreads, Fantastic Fiction, Nicholas Sparks' website, or any other resource that you are comfortable with, and look at the summaries of these books. Not so much the reviews, because you don't want spoilers, but look at the summaries of these books so that you don't find yourself worse off emotionally than you would be if you were like me. Like me, how? Well, I like sweet romance. I like happily ever afters. You're not always going to get that. You will get it in maybe a third of these books, but in most cases you won't. So I thought, even though I'm trying to end this video on a happy note, I just remembered that long conversation I had yesterday, and I do feel for her and what her family is experiencing right now, and reading books that have like that Greek tragedy type of vibe, that Romeo and Juliet type of vibe. But oh my goodness, if you like talent, then you're going to like Nicholas Sparks. So I'm trying to end this on a positive note. I hope that I did, but I want to thank you for watching, and I will be back with more. Thank you. Bye-bye.